There was something terribly wrong, something that had already happened. Not deep underground, not among flawed human beings, but right in the place we always believed was absolutely perfect. Heaven, a place with no tears, no suffering, no death, an eternal realm where light and holiness reign. But it was there that a horrifying betrayal broke out. And the consequence, 1/3 of all the angels, beings created by God Himself, vanished from His presence. Not destroyed, not erased, but fallen. Have you ever wondered what could possibly make a perfect being, living in the very presence of God, turn against the one who created them? Were they forced, or were they deceived? And if the angels, with their superior wisdom, strength, and holiness, could fall, then what is keeping us, weak and limited human beings, from falling too? In today's video, you and I are going to explore one of the greatest mysteries ever recorded in the entire history of the universe. Why did 1/3 of the angels choose to stand with Lucifer, against God? We will dive into the origin of evil, the very first thoughts that began to stir in the heart of Lucifer, how he drew other angels into his rebellion, and what truly happened in that cosmic war. This is not just an old story from the Bible. It is a lesson still unfolding, a battlefield that still lingers even now. And to fully understand the depth of this event, we need to start where it all began. Heaven, a perfect place, until pride appeared. Imagine a place with no darkness, where there is no need for the sun, yet light fills everything. A place of perfect order, no chaos, no conflict, no death. In that place, every being knows its role, and every action is an act of worship. That is heaven, the dwelling place of God, and the source of everything pure and eternal. In the midst of that orderly universe, there was one angel who was exalted above all others. None in the angelic host could match his beauty. None possessed a mind as sharp as his. None were as radiant, as powerful, or entrusted with greater honor than he was. He was called Lucifer, which means the morning star, son of the dawn, an anointed being, clothed in light, created without a single flaw. Ezekiel describes him as a perfect jewel placed in the holy garden, a symbol of ultimate purity and glory. Lucifer was not just an angel. He was an archangel, a leader, a model, a living symphony of beauty, wisdom, and divine strength. If anyone could be considered close to perfection, it was him. But it was precisely because he was the most favored that his story becomes both strange and deeply thought-provoking. For if even the most radiant of all beings, the one standing closest to the throne of God, could betray him, then what truly happened inside his heart? Why would a creature who was nearer to the glory of the Creator than anyone else become his most dangerous adversary? That question has troubled countless minds for thousands of years. And to begin answering it, we cannot just look at appearances. We must go deeper, to the very place where every choice begins, free will. In the next part, we will uncover a profound truth, that evil is not something created, but something absent. A distortion away from good, born of free choice. And that was the very starting point of the first fall in eternal history. There is one question that humanity has always struggled to understand. If God is absolutely good, then why does evil exist? Did He create it? Was evil part of His plan? That question is not just a modern one. It has troubled even the greatest minds of the ancient world. Saint Augustine, one of the greatest thinkers of the Church, once said something that makes us pause and reflect. Evil has no efficient cause. It is a deficiency. It is a fall, not a creation. In other words, evil is not a substance, nor is it a force with its own existence. It does not exist the way light or sound exists. Evil, much like darkness or silence, is simply the absence of something. You cannot create darkness. You can only block the light. You cannot create silence. You only have to stop the sound. And evil works the same way. It is not an independent being. It is the distance a creature chooses to place between itself and God, who is the source of all goodness. So, when Lucifer fell, what really happened? God did not give him evil, but he gave him, as he gave all the angels, free will, a sacred ability to choose. And it was in that choice that Lucifer no longer turned toward the light. He did not lose the light because God withdrew it. He lost it because he turned his back on the very source of that light, choosing another path, a path that seemed like freedom, but in truth led only to the abyss. And why does that matter for us? Because it reminds us that even in a perfect place, even when you are surrounded by glory, if your heart chooses to turn away from God, the abyss will appear. God does not need to create it. It only takes a will that no longer points to the light. And Lucifer was not alone. He did not fall by himself. There were other angels, those who once stood beside him in worship, who chose to follow his steps. But what could possibly lead them? Beings of wisdom and holiness, to believe in the path of betrayal. The answer begins with a very familiar emotion, pride. And pride was the very first doorway to the fall. Before there was betrayal, before there was a fall, Lucifer was not an adversary. He was the very symbol of glory. He stood right beside the throne of God, in a place no other being could ever step into. But those very gifts, wisdom, power, and beauty, became the most subtle trap of all. In Ezekiel chapter 28, the Lord declared, "Your heart became proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor." Here we see an ancient principle: whatever no longer points back to the giver, but instead turns to worship itself, will eventually become distorted. Lucifer no longer saw those gifts as tools for service. He began to see them as proof of his independence, as a reason to lift himself up as equal with the Creator. Commentators often compare Lucifer to the image of the king of Tyre, a man of power, wealth, and pride, who was ultimately destroyed for believing he was a god. That comparison is not accidental. It illustrates a timeless truth: power and beauty, when no longer surrendered to goodness, turn into destruction. Lucifer is the ultimate embodiment of that tragedy. When worship turns into self-admiration, the fall begins. This is not just a moral idea, it is a spiritual law. Because at that moment, the center of the universe is no longer God, but an inflated self craving the throne. For Lucifer, this shift did not happen in an instant. It began like a tiny spark in his heart, a secret thought. Why should he be the Most High and not me? From that seed of pride, an entire rebellion began to rise. This is not just the story of an ancient angel. It is a warning about a principle still at work within us today. Pride is the most subtle deception, because it convinces us that we do not need the source of life, that we no longer need anyone above us. It turned an angel into Satan, and it can turn any heart into a battlefield. But Lucifer did not stop with self-exaltation. Once he believed the lie within his own heart, he went even further. He nursed the greatest, most dangerous ambition a created being could ever have, to become like the Most High himself. And that was the turning point that opened the first rebellion of the universe. Once pride takes root, it does not stop at self-admiration. It grows, it consumes reason, and it turns desire into disaster. In the case of Lucifer, it was not just, "I am beautiful," or "I am greater than the others." It went much further, far beyond. It became a public declaration against the very order of heaven itself. In Isaiah chapter 14, we hear these arrogant words: "I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Just one statement, yet it contains the entire essence of Lucifer's rebellion. This was no longer simple pride. This was a divine coup, a created being, daring to replace the Creator. It was the intent to topple the eternal throne, the plan to seize the kingdom, the ambition to establish a new order of the universe, with himself at the center. Lucifer did not merely want freedom, as some might think. Freedom was already a gift God had given every angel from the very beginning. No one was forced to worship. No one was chained to glory. But Lucifer wanted more than the freedom to choose. He wanted self-rule. He wanted the throne. He wanted the ultimate crown. What made this rebellion terrifying was not only that it happened in heaven, but that it was led by the very one who had once been closest to God. The one who had beheld glory without a veil became the first to try and replace that glory with his own self. And when a mind as brilliant as Lucifer's was joined with such a twisted ambition, what do you think happened? He did not stand alone. He began to plant those ideas in the hearts of other angels, beings who had trusted him, admired him, and followed him. Slowly, from within the very courts of heaven, a lie began to spread. A lie wrapped in the language of justice, freedom, and truth. But to truly understand how he convinced holy beings to turn against their Creator, we need to go deeper into the darkest part of this story, the deception in heaven. Not through weapons, but through words. Not by force, but by reasoning. And that is what led 1/3 of the angels to believe they were fighting for what was right. There is a detail rarely mentioned, yet it plays an incredibly important role in the story of Lucifer's fall. A hidden reason, quiet but weighty, his jealousy of mankind. According to ancient tradition, after creating all things, God made humanity, not from light or spirit like the angels, but from the dust of the ground. A fragile and finite being, yet one that was given a gift. No angel had ever received life in the very image of God himself. And even more, he entrusted humanity with dominion over the earth, with sacred intimacy, and with a unique place in his divine plan. For many angels, this was a mystery to marvel at. But for Lucifer, who had already begun to love himself more than the one who created him, it was an insult he could not accept. Inside him rose a burning question, filled with outrage. I, a radiant angel, born of light, standing near the throne of glory, am I to bow beneath a creature shaped from dust? And so, jealousy took root. Not only jealousy that mankind was loved, but that they were loved in a way Lucifer never was. Not as servants, but as children, and that enraged him. Not only against mankind, but against God himself. From that moment on, humanity, though weak, though newly created, became the natural enemy in Lucifer's eyes. Because they were the living proof of the love he had rejected. They were the image of God he longed to replace. That is why, after he was cast out of heaven, Lucifer did not turn away in silence. He turned toward the earth. He sought out mankind, and he carried on his rebellion. This time, not against heaven, but against those who bore the image of God on the earth. But before that war could begin, Lucifer had to do something else. He had to draw others with him into the darkness. And he did not use force to do it. He used something far more dangerous: words, philosophy, reasoning, and the illusion of a more just universe. That deception began not on earth, but in the very heart of heaven. And it swept away millions of angels. Lucifer knew very well that an open rebellion against God would stand no chance. No angel, no matter how powerful, could ever match the Creator. But he also knew something else. The greatest betrayals do not begin with war. They begin with doubt. And so, in the stillness of heaven, among worship and radiant light, he began to whisper, not with shouts, but with whispers, a question as soft as the wind, yet sharp as a blade. Why should there be only one Most High? Were we not also created perfect? At first, those words seemed harmless, just a philosophical thought, an invitation to independent thinking. But from those questions, something began to shift in the minds of some angels. They no longer saw God as the sole fountain of truth, but as a ruler clinging to his throne. Lucifer framed his rebellion not as a crime, but as a revolution for justice. He spoke of freedom. He spoke of equality. He spoke of the right to know, of truths you were never allowed to see. He poured honeyed words into their ears. You are magnificent beings. Why should you bow forever? Why should the universe be ruled by only one throne? Truth is being hidden. I will show you what God has kept from you. Lucifer weaponized the very best within them, their wisdom, their reasoning, their longing for justice. He did not use force. He used words. And little by little, group by group, he bent loyalty until it no longer felt like devotion, but like chains that needed to be broken. And his final promise, the promise that drew the greatest number across the line, was this: you will no longer be servants, you will be gods. No swords were needed, no compulsion, just one idea, that there could be a freer world, a more just, a more enlightened world, if only they dared to step away from the light. And they stepped, but what they did not know was that once the light is left behind, darkness does not hesitate, and the price of that promised freedom was not a throne, but an eternal fall. Yet the question still remains: how could 1/3 of the angels, magnificent beings who once worshipped the same God, be swept up in such deception? Was that number only symbolic? Or was it a dreadful reality the Bible itself describes, through imagery, through divine language? In the book of Revelation, chapter 12, we read a symbolic yet weighty image. The great dragon swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky with its tail and cast them down to the earth. Immediately after, that same dragon is identified as the ancient serpent, the devil, that is, Satan. And the stars that were dragged down were the angels who chose to stand with him. Why 1/3? No one knows the exact theological reason behind that number. But the symbolism is clear. It was not a small group. And it was not the majority. It was a massive minority. A number large enough to cause a cosmic crisis. Large enough to fracture what was once perfect. Pause for a moment and imagine this 1/3 of all the angels. Beings who once lived in the light. Who once sang together. Who once lifted their voices in worship. Now no longer brothers, but enemies. That division was not just about power. It was the shattering of sacred relationship. It was the very first crack in a community that had once been flawless. A pain so deep that perhaps even heaven itself witnessed it with tears. Imagine Michael, the archangel, who had once fought side by side with Lucifer in holy battles, now forced to draw his sword against his former brother. An angel looking into the eyes of a friend he had once trusted, and seeing not light, but betrayal. Revelation does not give us the full details of the battle between the angels. But the image of the dragon dragging 1/3 of the stars down to the earth tells us enough. This was no random uprising. It was an organized conflict, with strategy and with heartbreak. 1/3 of the angels fell, and they would never return. But even with a loss that great, one truth remained unshaken. 2/3 chose to stand with the light. And they did not allow that betrayal to tear heaven apart forever. Yet the rebellion did not end there. Because when the fallen angels were cast out of heaven, the war did not stop. It only changed its battlefield. From the heights of heaven to the earth. And a brand new war began, where the throne of God was no longer the center of the struggle, but the heart of humanity. From heaven, Lucifer fell like a broken star. But that fall was not only a punishment, it was the beginning of a new battlefield, no longer in the skies, but here on the earth. Lucifer would never again be called by his glorious name. From that moment on, he bore a new title, Satan, which means the adversary. An angel who once walked in the light had now become a living shadow. Scripture calls him the father of lies, the deceiver of the whole world, the enemy of the human soul. And now, his target was no longer the throne of God, but the image of God on the earth, humanity, us. For we were created in the image of God, in freedom, in love, in a sacred dignity that Lucifer could never claim. And that is why he despises us more than anything else. And so, the war that began in heaven now takes place every day in the mind, in the choices, in the heart of every human being. If 1/3 of the angels, beings of wisdom, power, and greatness, could be deceived, who can be certain that we cannot? We are living in the midst of a war that many do not even see. A war with no bombs and no guns, yet with eternal consequences. A war between light and darkness, between truth and lies, between loyalty and betrayal. Where do you stand in that war? Today, we are not simply retelling an ancient story. We are being reminded of a living reality, that the fall never begins with a great act, but with small choices, a little self-satisfaction, a small lie, a trace of pride left unchecked. And that is why you must stay awake. The betrayal in heaven is not some distant legend. It is a warning for every heart that begins to believe it no longer needs God. Do not wait until the light has vanished to realize that you have lost your way. While you still have the chance to choose loyalty, because one day, everything will be revealed, and on that day, there will be no chance to choose again.